basics of leadership is you have to be able to inspire people to do something, and then you have to be able to mobilize people to do what you want them to do.
Welcome to the Leadership Initiative, where we explore the art and science of leadership through thought-provoking conversations with experts, thought leaders, and change makers. Whether you're a seasoned leader or just starting out on your leadership journey, this podcast is designed to provide you with the tools and inspiration you need to lead with purpose and make a meaningful difference.
Hello, welcome to the Fisher Leadership Initiative podcast. My name is Jen Knox Shanahan, and we are here today with John Hrusovsky. John is a certified IT business strategist with 35 plus years of proven government, business, nonprofit, and higher education experience in providing leadership, developing relationships, as well as organizing and implementing organizational, business process, and informational technology change. John is a thought leader in the IT, higher ed, government, and nonprofit industries through his involvement with many clients and organizations and numerous speaking engagements. John was the founder of JJH Consulting, which was purchased by an organization a year ago and is now the managing director of Synexis Consulting. John is the program advisor for the Ohio State University Fisher College of Business graduate certification in IT business strategy. John graduated from OSU in 1986 with a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration and a double major of MIS and Accounting. Hello, John.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here with us.
No problem.
So today, John and I will discuss strategic leadership, organizational transformation, and the art of facilitating insightful discussions. So, John, to begin, as a leadership advisor, how do you define effective strategic leadership in today's rapidly changing landscape?
Yeah, that's a tough question right off the bat, but it's an important question. I would define it as the ability for a leader to not only get something done, but also inspire individuals. To me, the basics of leadership is you have to be able to inspire people to do something, and then you have to be able to mobilize people to do what you want them to do. And in this climate, in this world, as technology continues to advance and we become more global, and there's more understanding of how important it is from a leadership perspective, it's really to in my mind, to be the definition, you have to be very good at inspiring and identifying what are the key things you want to go after as an organization. And then you have to be able to effectively work with your team to be able to mobilize, to be able to accomplish that. So to me, and those basics don't change, right? The environment around changes, the technology continues to advance. We'll talk about AI, I'm sure, as we have this conversation. But essentially the core of effective strategic leadership is the ability to be able to inspire and mobilize and do that on a constant basis within a changing environment.
Yeah, absolutely. So to inspire and mobilize it contains multitudes. Mm-hmm. I'm curious where a leader even starts.
Well, I would say that an effective leader I'm not so sure we're all born with the gene that makes us all great leaders. Mm-hmm. And so I would say that to be an effective leader, you have to understand the principles of it. Mm-hmm. You have to have a mentor, someone that you can lean on. So as we progress in our career early on, the chances of you being in a leadership position are probably not that great. Mm-hmm. But as you progress, you can learn from individuals, right? You can take from individuals you think are good leaders that are principled and are strategic, and don't take from folks that you think are not effective leaders, right? Yeah. So I think as you start out, and that's the mindset you have to have. And then you also have to be willing to take chances, right? Leaders are not always individuals that just go with the flow, right? They may have to, do something that makes them uncomfortable, right? And that's where good leaders are able to accomplish, that. And again, and I would say that you don't want to put yourself in a position where you feel like you're not effective, right? Because you continue to learn. I mean, I've been in this, in my career for a long time, and I feel like I'm always learning, and I have places to learn and ways to learn that can make me more effective as a leader.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that you say that we do have to get out of our comfort zones, and we also have to be strategic. And I'm curious, when you're thinking about organizational strategy, what are the critical elements that really go into a robust and actionable strategy?
Yeah. So there's a concept. It's not a new concept. It's probably been out there for maybe 30, 40 years. We call it the balanced scorecard. Okay. And the concept is that to have an effective organizational strategy, you have to balance between all the different aspects of your business. So let's just say that you're a consulting firm, right? So you want to have a part of your business is developing out and achieving new clients, right? Another aspect of it is to be able to work with different partners that you have to work with in the field. Another one is delivering good work to the clients that you're doing work for. And let's say another one is operational excellence. And so to have an organizational strategy, you have to think about all of those across your organization, right? So you can't just be the leader of the organization and you're solely focused on generating more work, right? Because if you generate more work, that's great, but if you don't have good delivery, that's bad, right? So you have to have a balanced concept, right? And so, matter of fact, in my organization, our fiscal year starts today, right? Our new fiscal year, and we've developed out a set of 16 objectives that we want to accomplish during this fiscal year, and it cuts across a balance of our organizational structure and effect, and so that we want to be effective across the whole organization versus just some aspects of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And getting everything down on paper and thinking about things holistically is something that is a starting point. And I'm just curious, when it comes to daily operations and decision making and getting the entire culture on board with new initiatives or a year's initiatives, what is your advice there? That's a big question, but
yeah. Well, I mean, as the leader, it goes back to what we talked about earlier, which is it's around inspiring, right? So
yes.
So like it's not unusual for me as a leader to put ideas out to my team and then see how if they think it's a good idea or not a good idea, right? It's not like, I have all the good ideas and everything that I do is like, then they're just going to follow along, right? So you as an effective leader, you have to be able to, put some ideas out there and then talk about them and make sure you've got alignment within your organization. And that's where the inspire comes in, right? Because you can inspire them and say, hey, we can do this, right? So as an example, if one of the objectives of your organization is to double your sales over the next year, and I'm just making this up as an example, right? It's got to be believable that you can do that. And then then you have to inspire your leadership team to be able to want to accomplish that. And then you have to put together an operational plan, kind of mobilize to be able to effectively do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if there is resistance, do you have any advice around just a team's resistance maybe to change if they're used to things a certain way?
Yeah, well, there's I probably get more resistance from my clients than I do from my team because since my firm was purchased a year ago, right, we're really kind of in startup mode, right? And so when you're in startup, there tends to be more flexibility of the organization as you're building out. Having said that, though, it's also really important to hire and bring on individuals that are willing to take chances, right? Where they don't feel like if they make a mistake, they're going to get penalized for that, right? In a certain way, right? So I think it's, and then also as a leader, if you get resistance, you got to be flexible, right? There's more than one way to get to where you want to get to eventually, right? So you have to, as a leader, you can't just be like adamant, hey, this is what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to do it, and here's the approach we're going to take. You have to be able to understand the dynamics and understand how people feel, right? And understand and listen to them to make sure you understand, and they understand where you're coming from. You understand where they're coming from. And I will say that I've been very lucky. I've been working in the consulting world for a long time, and in the consulting world, it's not a command and control, right? You're consulting, and so you have to win the argument. So if I have an idea with my client, I can't just say to my client, hey, I'm making this name up. Hey, Rob, we just need to do this. Rob may say, well, wait a second, I'm the client. I'll decide what we're going to do, right? But what you can say is you can say, hey, Rob, here's what I think we should do, and here's why I think we should do it, right? And have a conversation related to that so that you're developing out a strategy that becomes inclusive and also is aligned with the individuals you're working with.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious in terms of that alignment when we're thinking about anything from hiring, even maybe to training. How do you recognize that alignment? How do you connect with people and figure these things out and understand where the gaps and maybe knowledge or alignment are?
Yeah, well, I mean, you try to get a feel for individuals when if your question relates to kind of the hiring process and bringing people onto your team, right? You try your best during an interview process to see if there is alignment, right? But it's less about that, and it's more about actually what I would call kind of like core like capabilities or maybe like leadership characteristics. So because you want diversity, right? You want individuals on your team that have different views and different opinions, right? Yes. That's important. But what you need to see is, are these individuals you're going to be working with, are they, do they have leadership capabilities? Are they willing to step out into an uncomfortable situation? Are they willing to take a chance, right? Are they, how do they act in critical, maybe stressful situations, right? Maybe, that you hire I'm making this up, a person who's going to lead up your operational team, and that person, you think has the capabilities, but maybe doesn't have all the experience, right? So, how does that person react when maybe that person's getting some resistance, right, early on, right? Or in our case, we are a subsidiary of a larger organization, right? So we want to take advantage of what the parent organization is providing us. At the same time, we want to make sure that, because our business model is different than theirs, so we have to make sure that we hire people that are flexible, that can work within that context, right? That it can't, has to be their way or the highway, in all cases. So I think you try your best, and then you kind of mold your, in some ways, the leader has to mold his or her leadership style to reflect, the team they have as well too. So that's part of, of leadership.
Yeah. And it seems like that would take a lot of self-awareness.
Well, you hope it does, and you hope you have that, right?
Yeah.
And who knows? Sometimes you think you have it, and maybe you don't. But you try to, and you got to be comfortable to have conversations with folks, right? To talk about it, right? Are we doing the right things? Or do you feel like we're making the progress that we want to make? Or you feel like you're making the career progress you want to have, and so forth?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you share an example of a particularly challenging transformation?
How much time do we have? Well, to give you a little bit more context, right? In my world, I've been working in this, these large IT projects for years, right? And so just the concept of doing a transformational change where you're taking out old technology and putting in new technology, right, to support a business process or multiple business processes. And just in the nature of that is hard, right? People, there really is, people don't want to change, right? Like if I'm driving to here for this discussion, and someone tells me, why don't you go this other way? I'm like, well, I always go this way, right? Like, why would I go, well, we found out if you do the GPS, it's actually quicker to go the other way. I don't really care. I want to go this way, right? This is the way I go. So intuitively, you're dealing with a lot of resistance, yes, right? And a lot of change, and just in the work that we do. So having said that, I'll give you an example, right? You asked for an example, right? We were, working on a project. I won't name the client, but it's a higher ed institution a couple years ago. And they were, the leadership team was like, just kind of like, they were marching down this path to get to the go live date, right? And I remember having a conversation with the CIO of the organization and the CFO, the two executive sponsors, and I said, we have to make sure that when we get to that date and we go live, right, we're successful. And they're like, well, we're going to be successful. And I said, well, there's risk that we're going to be successful because our training is behind schedule. We haven't had as much kind of organizational change readiness activities as we need. Our data is not necessarily where it needs to be. So, so I explained to them why we're at risk of being successful. Right. And so after a whole series of conversations, they moved the date, and they actually moved the date out about 9 months, right, from that. That was the best thing that they possibly could have done. But there was a lot of resistance to that. There was a lot of anxiety, right? It was going to cost them more money, right? They have all these, expectations that have been set, right? And I kept coming back to, well, that's all great. But if we do this and this thing blows up, then guess what? All those expectations that you wanted are never going to be achieved. Yes. So to me, that's an example of that was difficult, right? That was difficult because, and it makes it even more difficult because as a consultant, I'm not in charge, right? Like I can't tell the CFO and the CIO of this institution, hey, this is what we're doing. Right here, right? Again, you have to win the argument. You have to explain to them why it's important and show them that this is a better way to go. And that is that's I would say that's one example related to kind of the work I've done. But also, I would give another example of I've been fortunate enough to build out several organizations and then sell them, right? And so when you do that, sometimes when you go through that process, when you're getting started, it's hard, right? Because even though you have a vision of where you want to go and where you want to get to, you're kind of on your own to do that, right? So that can be a challenge, right? When you're trying to work, on building out an organization with the idea that maybe if you do it in the way you think you can do it, you may be able to either really kind of jumpstart it into a much more large organization or have it sold, so anyway, that's a couple examples.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like you're really working with people at so many different stages and with so many different preconceived expectations about how things will go. That takes a lot of moderation skills.
Yeah. Yeah, that and patience. Yeah. And just,
What are the essential techniques or principles that you implement to facilitate these discussions with groups, with leadership, in order to ensure that things are heard?
Right. Well, I mean, there's techniques where they, like you can say where every voice in the conversation needs to be heard, right, and every opinion matters, and those are very true. You want diversity of opinion. You want to make sure you're inclusive of individuals that are part of it. Those are all, kind of the buzzwords, right? But it's really just, in my mind, Jen, it's really like, doing on others as you want them to do on you, right? So it's really like if you're going to be in a conversation with someone and you're working together, right? You want to treat them with respect because you want to be treated with respect, right? So I think it's really like kind of common sense in some ways, right? That you can't, and there used to be leaders that could just say, this is the way we're going to do it, and end of story, right? Well, I think those days are gone, right? And I think they're gone because I think people don't want to put up with that, but also I think you miss out when you don't have that. Now, that doesn't mean that you want to be wishy-washy all the time as a leader. And, and if you're the last person that talks to me, that's the way we're going, right? You want to make sure that you incorporate in, people's thoughts. But at the end of the day, as a leader, you do have to, draw a conclusion, and then you have to inspire the group to say, this is where we're going, right? This is what we're going to do, and then this is how we're going to do it, right? But again, all through that process, you've got to make sure that, you're bringing the people along, and they're being brought along willingly versus just doing it because, you're the managing director or the CEO or whatever the title is for the lead person in that process.
Wow. Thank you so much for everything today. This has been a fantastic discussion. I've really enjoyed it. And I'm sure our listeners will too. Have a lovely day, John.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks again for listening. This podcast is presented by the Max M. Fisher College of Business at The Ohio State University. For more episodes, find us on Apple, Google, or podcast.osu.edu/leadership initiative. See you next time.